My name is Jean-Paul Bevilacqua. I'm a program developer here at OJEN, the Ontario Justice Education Network. This is actually the first webinar of the academic year. We had a fantastic Summer Law Institute during the last week of August, a few weeks back at this point. Our webinars from that week are uploaded, so please do check those out. If you missed any or want to consult them again, bring them into the classroom. It was a really great week. So thank you to those of you who joined us for that. And yeah, so this is this privacy webinar is the first of the academic year. And just for a little bit of history and context, when I entered this new role with OJEN, I just happened to be in a tour bus in Italy with our presenter, and Tiffany was talking to me about her work, and specifically about social media platforms and privacy concerns and elements. And I thought, wow, this would be a great thing to hear about for young people and those who work with them and who are in their lives. And Tiffany graciously agreed to give up some of her time in her very busy work schedule to be with us here tonight. So thank you. At the end, there'll be a feedback form that my great colleague Christy will put into the chat, so we get to hear from you always about these sessions. Keep it as a conversation, how we can improve, what you want to hear more about, etc. But before we begin formally, I'd like to acknowledge the land that I'm currently on. Although I know there are many of you from across Ontario with us tonight, I'm currently speaking to you from Toronto, and I'm acknowledging that that is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat people, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. I also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. And this month I want to talk about two things that are on my mind when I do that acknowledgement. The first is a tragedy that James Smith Cree Nation in Saskatchewan and their community are currently processing and dealing with that occurred earlier this month. And I especially want to pay attention to the communities and the community's leadership's calls for justice support, their own tribal police force and drug treatment centers for that community, and not just pay attention to it, but make decisions in our day-to-day life and the democratic process that allow those things to come to fruition, because they're being very clear in their calls and what they need, and it's imperative that we listen. Secondly, as I'm sure most of you are aware, at the end of the month, September 30th is the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, also Orange Shirt Day. And this came into pass with the federal government passing Bill C5 in June of last year to allow for the creation of this staff holiday. So I personally, as I approached it last year and doing the same this year, how best to commemorate it with the lens that it is that is to be a day of reflection and action on the tragedy experienced by Indigenous people as a result of our country's former residential school system, a system that actually just ended in the 1990s. Okay, with that, I would like to introduce our speaker today. Tiffany Wong is a former, actually current Osgoode grad, former Osgoode law student, so we share that in common with Christy as well. She's a legal, privacy, and regulatory compliance professional currently working on AI and data governance, data ethics, digital and fintech initiatives in the financial service industry, and has previous experience in journalism and corporate law. And I will say that I understood, I think, 50% of the terms that I just listed there, so I'm eager for Tiffany to explain the others. She studied at McGill University with a student exchange at Sciences Po Paris, is that right?
Sciences Po Paris.
Sciences Po Paris, thank you for correcting that. And obtained her law degree from Osgoode, as I mentioned, and was called to the bar in 2012. So with that, Tiffany, I will say that let's make this a conversation. Tiffany is keen to answer any questions you may have, so please use the Q&A function, the chat function as well. I'll be fielding those questions and making sure that Tiffany has a chance to answer that. And with that, I'll start sharing the slides if you're ready, Tiffany.
Yeah.
All right, here we go. Now.
Okay.
And Christy, can I just get an okay from you or Tiffany that you can see the first slide?
That's great. Yeah, I see the intro slide and then the next
There we
one's
go.
agenda. There we go. All right, so this is the agenda slide. Thank you, JP, for the introduction. It's kind of funny how we were on a tour bus at one point and now we're here. So thank you for having me, and I look forward to this presentation. I just want to start with a disclaimer. This presentation content is for legal information only and not to be constituted as legal advice. And all opinion and errors or omissions are our own. So I can respond to questions related to privacy law generally, but not necessarily specific information security or safeguarding risks, like what exactly happens when your phone, scans an image of your face, or what does browsing incognito do, technically speaking. It's a bit beyond my technical expertise, but I can comment generally that they are information and cybersecurity questions. And I have some intuitions what those experts would say, but I can't say exactly how some technology operates in detail. And honestly, they're not particularly transparent. So I'll comment on them at a high level if you have such questions. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's start off with a primer. What is privacy? And it's important to ask why privacy would be considered as important to defend as a right, such as safety or freedom of expression. I'll be looking specifically at our rights to privacy when it comes to personal information, or PI, so I'll use that term PI quite often. And this includes the privacy rights of children and minors. It's a bit of a nebulous philosophical, legal, social, and technological concept, which means different things to different observers. However, an influential 1890 Harvard Law Review article famously defined privacy as a right to be let alone, but we'll call it right to be left alone because it just makes more sense in our modern parlance. And common areas of privacy that are particularly interesting for our discussion is data protection and privacy laws, which includes information privacy. The next piece to understand is what is personal information, or PI. Most privacy protections apply to personal information, which is basically any information traceable to an identifiable individual. So it's defined very broadly, and it can include things like a student number, a photograph, social insurance number, which is quite sensitive, date of birth, also pretty sensitive, biometrics like a facial scan, very, very sensitive. Or even inferences or automated decision-making tailored to an individual, such as online behavioral advertising and sub-website tracking cookies. And this is yes.
Sorry, I just wanted to jump in here. And just on that kind of definition piece, I'm just wondering, in your mind, as you've done so much thinking about privacy, for me, I remember hearing that definition, the right to be left alone. For me, the definition, my personal definition, has always been like the right to not be seen if you don't want to be seen. And how does that conflict with the concept of privacy that you've explored and interacted with your work? And is it too broad, too narrow? Does it conflict at all?
I don't think so. I mean, the concept of the right to be left alone, or let alone in the older way of saying it, it could include the right to not be seen, not to be heard, to be left alone, like truly alone.
Right.
You can say what you want, do what you want, get dressed, that sort of thing, without someone watching you or surveying you without your knowledge or consent.
Right.
So it is viewed increasingly as a human right, and it is enshrined in the Constitution. So it's something considered inviolable, such as your right to freedom of expression. But there are, reasonable limits.
Thank you.
Yeah, so basically, we've talked about some common examples of PI in day-to-day life, and it gets more complicated with some of the new technology that we're going to talk about, and especially related to consent and transparency. But let's first start in the next slide with a brief intro from an eye-opening documentary, and it's available on YouTube or Amazon Prime if you want to, watch the whole thing. It's by an Australian broadcaster called ABC TV. They have an investigative journalism program called Four Corners, and it sets the stage pretty well for some of the issues we're about to discuss about online reputation, safety, surveillance, and this clip discusses how TikTok, which is particularly popular these days, uses its algorithm to influence users' behavior, particularly as it relates to mental health. And keep in mind some of these algorithmic designs as we venture into some safety tips later in this discussion about online reputation for students and pretty much anybody online, including ourselves. So let's take a look.
I want to hear actually from just a prompt from the group, if there's anything there that surprised you. It was so surprising to me. And then also, like, I kind of want to know how they would rate my face and what they were, what type of issues my face presents based on their algorithm. I think it's really fascinating and a bit scary. Tiffany, I'll return to the PowerPoint now. But yeah, if there are any comments in the chat, please go ahead, or any questions about that. Next slide, Tiffany.
Yep, sure. Okay, so that video is some food for thought. It actually goes into a lot more detail about some of the kind of manipulative things that social media can do using algorithms, but a lot of it is a little mysterious. So we have to protect ourselves. I've adapted some of these next slides from the Office of the Privacy Commissioner of Canada, the OPC, which is Canada's federal privacy regulator. And they have a really great series of resources for teachers designed to raise privacy awareness in an age-appropriate manner. And I'll run through some of these lessons and provide a list of resources at the end of this presentation. But for starters, as we discussed, privacy is a fundamental part of digital citizenship. And in other words, exercising our right to privacy is part of being an ethical and engaged citizen of the internet. And I want to ask you, how many of you have a smartphone and use at least one social media network? You can say yes or no to yourself. Chances are it's yes. And you probably know how easy it is to snap a photo, add a comment, post it online. And what is less commonly known is that can be nearly impossible to delete a photo or comment once it's posted. And once you've deleted it, or from your own view, it might still exist for someone else's view or exist on a server somewhere. And that's why it's so important to think before you click and always reflect on what you're posting and why you're posting it, and ask yourself, is it appropriate? Is it true? Especially for young people who might not think of these things before they post or comment.
Tiffany, I remember parental advice, or maybe it was teacher advice from my childhood, and this was not related to social media, obviously, because I wasn't around when I was a child, but basically in your behavior or putting things in writing, acting, saying, are you comfortable with that action, those words being on the front page of the Globe and Mail the next day? Was always kind of the check that I was encouraged to keep in mind, and was kind of relayed down to us in school too. And
I had the same one. I had the same example.
Okay,
it's always the Globe and Mail for some reason.
Yeah.
But yeah, like we talk about it in different contexts. It could be what you say or what you do, but now what you say and do can be recorded or photographed and then disseminated very widely. And so the risk of that appearing on the front page of the Globe and Mail is actually much higher. It's not just the Globe and Mail, but it's on like all the social media websites, their friends of friends. And so I think it warrants a lot more concern, but a lot of it is a bit out of our control. Like, how much can we prevent other people from uploading a group photo that we happen to be in?
Yeah.
And so that's something that I don't have an answer for, except to be careful where you can, like within reason. But some people go much further by not participating online or refusing to have their photos taken. Or
I'm thinking too, when you said that group picture, I don't know why this came to mind, but the whole hoopla around Finland's prime minister, and she's a 30-something-year-old woman and was at a party in her off time or downtime, and participants of that party spread kind of footage of that, and you saw the kind of storm that rained down on her for not really doing anything objectively legally wrong, but really just that her private life was exposed through these channels that had a lot of uptake, right? And it created a big hassle for her.
Yeah, it's very difficult when you're a public person, like a politician or, a famous actor, because sometimes the expectation is that your life is public, your persona is public, and therefore if you're doing something that might be private for other individuals, for you it's like fair game for everybody. But it depends on the privacy laws and where they exist. I'm not familiar with Finland's privacy laws, but on the face of it, it seems privacy invasive. If we're saying that privacy is a right, she does have a right to a private life, which might include partying, which is separate from her professional life. Exactly. If she was partying as prime minister in an official capacity, that's another question.
Yeah, I thought it was just such a kind of amped up example of the risk that kind of a blurring of professional and personal lives as a result of social media, and then the questions of reputation, as you have on your slide too.
Yeah, and practically speaking, what is she to do if she wants to go to a party, request that everyone put away their phones? Mm. And that in itself is a bit of an overreach of other people's, freedom of expression or whatever, mobility. But that it's a tricky question. I can only point out the various areas of trickiness, basically. Yeah, there's no definite right answer. It's quite gray. All right, so let's go on to the next slide, which kind of segues into what you post on the internet is not always private. I mean, that's a fact. Surprisingly, not everybody knows this, because basically, how often do you read a privacy policy that pops up when you download a new app? If you don't, you might be surprised to discover that the stuff you post on some of your favorite social media sites is not private at all. They don't even purport to protect it. And even if you restrict your privacy settings, some social networking sites do not guarantee that only your friends and online contacts will see your personal information. We have a news clip that's related directly to this later in our discussion. And any content that you post or send in an email can be copied, pasted, transmitted anywhere else on the internet. Be aware that your information can be saved onto hard drives, printed, emailed to anyone else. And so it's important to think carefully about what you post, email, and upload, because there's no guarantee that it will stay private. And moreover, websites often use cookies. They're small files of text that can collect and store information like the internet protocol or IP address of your computer, the software that you've installed on your computer, or even your preferences for viewing that website. And some cookies even store a history of the pages and items that you have looked at. Because how else do you think online marketers are able to suggest to you new products and services that make you think that your phone is listening to your conversations or reading your mind? But really, a lot of this information is collected from your online behavior, aka clicks. And further, to compound that, how many of us have mindlessly clicked to agree on privacy policies and cookie settings without reading it? And what's the point of asking us for consent to use our personal information if it's buried in fine print and full of legalese, or the privacy policy isn't even fully transparent with what the social media app or website is doing with their PI? And so these are, go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt. Can you,
go ahead.
Do you have any insight as to why I imagine a lot of us or all of us have been asked to accept new cookies on all the websites as of late?
So I think this comes from the EU cookie legislation. That's not the official legal name. It's just known as the cookie regs or whatever. And it did kind of overemphasize the need for consent. And so it said, if there's a cookie dropped on by your webpage to a user in the EU, and now it seems to be spreading elsewhere, you have to agree, explicitly agree. And you can even select which cookies to agree to. And what happened in practice is that nobody reads it. Everyone just clicks accept. And is that consent really meaningful? Probably not. And it's annoying. So I think the EU is working on new cookie regulations, but that hasn't really come to fruition yet. The emphasis seems to be now on browser settings. So it's up to you to go into your browser and set what cookies to use or delete. But that also assumes a certain level of tech savviness, which is, again, not that meaningful if some people, many average users won't go in and set all their cookie settings in their browser.
It's interesting that there's all these, the approach is our regulation that act as stopgaps, as opposed to kind of outlawing that type of action and collection to begin with. Do you know what I mean? Like
it tries.
Yeah, right.
It tries. I mean, I'm definitely in favor of privacy legislation and regulations, but technology moves so quickly that the laws can't catch up. So generally the laws and regulations are quite broad and tend to be tech neutral. It'll just say you need meaningful consent. Mm-hmm. What does that mean? Based on the platform you use, the social media platform you use, the information you collect, that could be different. And so there's a lot left to interpretation. And what has resulted are these super long privacy policies that nobody reads. So, is consent meaningful? Or these super annoying cookie pop-ups that people also don't read. Mm-hmm. So that's not meaningful. So then where do we go from here is a big question. Are we over relying on consent? Because we might have to face it. Our data is out there and some of it's beyond our control. So really, it might be a top-down approach actually to managing people's privacy rather than from the individual up.
Right.
So these are good questions. Maybe if we go on, we will see a little bit more about this type of issue, which is think before you click. I don't think some people realize that every single click that you make online is measured. You might have certain privacy settings, you might not use certain social media platforms, but if you click on an ad or if you go to a certain website, someone somewhere is probably recording that and making inferences about you. So, before you accept the terms and conditions of any social network, website, or app, read the fine print carefully to ensure you're comfortable with the potential outcome of the choice. So for example, by accepting, are you giving permission for an app to access photos or contact lists on your mobile device? That's a simple thing to look out for. I do acknowledge a lot of its legalese, and you might come out saying like, what are they actually doing? And that's a problem in a lot of terms and conditions. And think of the words public and permanent when you're posting something online. It can be spread around to any number of people without you knowing it. And even if you delete it, like we said, there's no guarantee that it's gone, and there could be another copy that resurfaces in the future. And this segues to protect your reputation. Some of this is common sense, but I think, if you're teaching young people, it might not be the first thing that pops into their mind. Just don't send sexual images or messages across the internet through your phone. The risks and consequences to your reputation can be too great. And it's important to think before you post, like everything in your profile, comments, photos, and even the result of that quiz that determine what kind of bagel you are, could be seen by thousands of people, and it can be difficult to erase. So it's generally a good idea to think about how all the information you're posting can help others form an impression of you, your personality, how you behave in real life. And if you're not sure about posting something, don't. And a best practice is to set and restrict your privacy settings where possible. Most social networking websites have customizable privacy settings that allow you to control who sees and what you post. You can restrict your profile content to specific groups and individuals, as opposed to it being viewable by anyone. And you should revisit your settings every so often to make sure that the setting options have not changed by the website or the app. And remember that whatever control you do have, it's only at the front end. If a friend copies your picture and sends it around to other people, the damage may have already been done.
I'm thinking about a lot of things, but one is also what type of bagel I would be. And so now I need to find that quiz, Tiffany.
Oh, it's out there. Then they'll get all these ads for like that type of bagel.
Oh, that's okay. That's dangerous. I'm wondering if from our audience, and this, again, this can go in the chat or Q&A, I'm wondering, just out of curiosity and for our work, where these types of discussions around online activity privacy arise in your classrooms in the Ontario curriculum. I'm curious about that. So if you could share with us, I would appreciate that. Thank
Yeah, I'm also interested in kind of where the temperature is at with the next generation. I think a lot of privacy ethics and comfort with sharing information and can change depending on what kind of technology you've grown up with. Like, TikTok seems to be associated with, teenagers now, and then Facebook with the older generation, and so on and so forth. So I think people's values change over time, and I'm curious to know what direction it's going in. I have a sense it's going to be more open. And so the next one is a myth. If a website or app has a privacy policy, that means it will not share my personal information with anyone. So that is false. Because according to information provided by the OPC, citing MediaSmarts, 68% of Canadian youth mistakenly believe that a privacy policy means a company won't use or share their personal information with others. And this simply is not true. Privacy policies and terms of use can be very difficult to understand, as we've mentioned earlier. And it does recommend that an adult or parent or guardian should review these privacy policies with young people. But I also ask, can adults, parents, and legal guardians even understand these policies and terms and conditions without engaging a lawyer? And this is a growing issue in the global privacy landscape with consent and transparency, as we've been talking about all along.
And I'll say too, it's also, OJEN, we talk a lot about access to justice, and that's part of our mandate. It's also an access to justice and knowledge of legal rights and an awareness of legal rights and what we're agreeing to. It falls under that kind of greater quest that governments have right now of broadening access to justice. And I think it's important that we link those pieces as well. I have a comment here from Sophia, who says, I work as a caseworker, education manager at a community center, so I usually discuss online safety when facilitating cyberbullying workshops or consent workshops. That's fantastic. I'm glad that communities are able to access that knowledge through you, Sophia.
Yeah, that's a great thing to do. Like, some of the stuff that I'm saying, sometimes depending on who you're talking to, is extremely common sense. Like, look both ways before you cross the street, be careful before you post. But that's not necessarily common knowledge to everybody. And I think especially with young people, they might not have heard it before, and have already started using games and online quizzes and things like that. And I do want to bring this back to a real life example. So many of you may have heard of Facebook, and now called Meta, and their Cambridge Analytica scandal in the 2010s. And where, even though there was a privacy policy with broad consents, it notably did not provide sufficient transparency about protection from Facebook sharing, selling, or safeguarding personal information from Cambridge Analytica, which is a separate company. And Cambridge Analytica provided political consulting services and has been accused of using the data gleaned from Facebook to influence several elections around the world, unbeknownst to those who were using Facebook for, I think it was an online a quiz about their political leanings. And so in its investigation, a UK privacy regulator found that Facebook breached its data protection laws by failing to keep users' personal information secure and allowing Cambridge Analytica to harvest the data of up to 87 million people without their consent worldwide.
And I think we'll go straight to the video clip if you want to give a little.
Yeah, sure. So we have a news clip that kind of talks about these issues, particularly about about enforcement. Basically, are these companies getting away with this? And let's see who is and who isn't.
Recent, quite monumental decision that Meta is, of course, appealing. But yeah, I'm wondering, Tiffany, how that landed with you in terms of both what you think about the decision and its ramifications globally.
Yeah, so this is an example of the EU exercising its enforcement muscle. They tend to be the leaders in doing that. under the General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR. They are, leading the world in the standard for privacy and also issuing massive fines, which is kind of a new thing in the privacy world. And Canada is following suit with a much overdue digital charter under Bill C-27, which was reintroduced actually, because it was formerly Bill C-11 on June 16th of this year. And the new proposed Canadian federal legislation is still undergoing the process of becoming law, likely to the end of 2022 or even into winter, spring 2023. We're monitoring it quite closely in the privacy world, but the bill proposes a number of changes, including protection of the privacy of minors, further governance of AI or artificial intelligence, and significant fines and penalties for non-compliance, which is what the EU has tried to do here. It's not really surprising that a ginormous company like Meta is appealing it, and they have the deep pockets to do so. So sometimes I wonder if these big fines are really effective or even big enough. And sometimes these big scary fines that appear in legislation are really directed at these large companies and not at smaller companies. And so Bill C-27 has also proposed that for minors protection, that when children play games, use educational apps, or interact with friends on social media, they are providing their data without realizing it. And parents should be able to intervene on behalf of their children or adults. And children need to be able to make mistakes online and should not be followed by their actions later in life. And so Bill C-27 proposes special status for children's data, added protections and safeguards that would apply to this data, and that children's information should be deleted immediately upon request. And while I still think it's not easy to determine if someone is a minor or adult online, because you can lie about your age when opening a social media account, I think it is a step in the right direction because it doesn't really have a lot of guidance at this point.
Well, I think too, Tiffany, and you talking about kind of government responsibility and regulations there, and that, I mean, yeah, you can only ensure so much. That's where the individual responsibility and self-protection and protection of vulnerable people comes into play too. It needs to be kind of a multi-pronged approach, it sounds like.
Yeah, and there's only so much we can do as individuals. And then, for minors who haven't, become the age of consent, it's even harder to understand what secondary use means or privacy settings. And so I think a lot of it needs to come from the top.
Alicia asked, by children, are we assuming up to age 18? And for this conversation, yes, right, Tiffany?
It actually depends on the legislation. So okay. I think in the EU, and don't quote me on this, it's 13 and up. In other areas, it's 16 or 14. It's different depending on the jurisdiction. Just like in Canadian law, a minor is different depending on whether it's tax law or criminal law, that sort of thing. So I don't think they've fully established an age, but I think generally we can say like around the teens would be a reasonable age to assume that someone's a minor. So we could safely say 18 and under, but in some cases it can be young as 13.
Okay, we'll go back to the slides now.
Okay, so let's talk about emerging technology. And this is where I will fully admit we're just monitoring these changes. And I think when I mentioned to JP the metaverse, he's like, what's that? And I was like, I don't know either, but let's try. So starting with this one, facial recognition. Is it really harmless to post a dance routine on TikTok? Well, let's think about this a bit more. So as you see from this article from a well-known organization called the Electronic Frontier Foundation, EFF, facial recognition technology takes images of human faces and tries to extract information about the people in them. So something like what we saw in that TikTok documentary, their identity, emotions, and you can make inferences about their preferences. And some companies claim they can use facial recognition technologies to assign demographic attributes to their targets, including gender, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, and age, to market to individuals better, identify individuals in criminal cases, or some are concerned about government surveillance of protesters, for example, or even discrimination against people on the basis of race or gender for hiring purposes. And this raises interesting questions about who owns the website, the app, or the organization behind some of these platforms where faces can be identified. And are these organizations really transparent about what they're doing with your images, especially of minors? And you might think as well, like you probably might use your face to open your phone and unlock it. Do we, some might say this phone is storing the moment or capturing your face or simply just unlocking it. That's a technical question. I think someone who's closer to mobile phone design could answer it, but it does highlight a privacy issue in terms of like how valuable is the information on your face and how much more personal can it get than an image of your face. So if you post your face online dancing, it's not really that innocent because it does show a lot about you.
Yeah, I mean, Tiffany, when you and I were having discussions about this presentation, I was curious on this point about the difference between recognition and capturing, and is there one, right? And I know we can't get into the nitty gritty of that answer, but it's interesting to me because for some reason I'm more comfortable with, the convenience of having my face recognized to open my phone and open apps and to remember passwords so I don't have to type them in, but definitely less comfortable with the idea of that kind of the idea of permanence, right? So something to consider.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I was concerned when we were first using fingerprint to open our phones. And right. What I understand at the time, because the technology has changed a lot, is that it's only stored within it's only stored within your device, not with Apple, not with any other app that's using the app store. Right. And so that's what I understood for the fingerprint. I'm not so sure about the face. It might be similar, but again, what is publicly disclosed is not what is always actually happening. And so things like an Alexa, there have been claims about it not actually, storing excessive information about your voice or your commands, but then it turns out that it is, and then it isn't, and then there's a lawsuit, and then there's a fine, and then they appeal the fine. So where does the truth actually lie is sometimes unclear. At the end of the day, it's like, well, that was true 5 years ago. I just don't know what's happening now, or even tomorrow, or even in the next update. And that's the really tricky part. It's that it's hard to know for sure. All right. Something else that's tricky, the metaverse. So what is the metaverse? How many of you have heard of it? And can someone try to define for us what it is?
Yeah, why don't you, if anyone's interested, just throw a word or two or a definition if you have one.
Without Googling it.
Yeah, without Googling it. Because when Tiffany was telling me about this on that fateful bus ride, I had no idea what she was referring to, and still not totally clear. So I'm interested to hear what perceptions are out there. But for now, we can just start the conversation.
Yeah, sure. It's a tough question, and your guess is as good as mine. And I don't purport to be an expert in this area, but I am keeping a close eye on it. And the metaverse has become one of those catchphrases like artificial intelligence and machine learning, and which can really cover a wide range of digital uses of PI and in huge volumes like big data. And if it reaches mainstream adoption, as we've seen with the rise of cell phones and social media, it's a very rapidly changing area. But at a high level, historically, the metaverse is a portmanteau of meta and the universe. And the term was first used by author Neil Stephenson in his 1992 sci-fi novel Snow Crash to describe a widely used virtual world in his imagined 21st century dystopia. And it's funny that it's a dystopian novel. And it's currently a major buzzword in the world of tech, business, finance, and like all buzzwords, its definition is fuzzy and quite debatable. But generally at a super, super high level, the metaverse is a form of augmented reality or AR platform that allows users to create an interactive experience that merge the digital world with the physical world. If you've ever heard of the game or the platform Second Life. So for example, you can buy digital real estate, even next to Snoop Dogg. You can go virtual shopping for clothes at, Gucci. You can be hanging out with friends in a virtual lounge and then switch to gathering your digital avatars together in an immersive metaverse classroom for school. And so, yeah, it does sound like sci-fi and pretty space age, but by offering a 3D environment, the metaverse could become a new virtual environment for social and ultimately commercial activity for all of us, which raises even more questions about privacy than it answers for now. So that said, we've got some resources for teachers, and it doesn't cover, some of the new emerging technology, but it focuses more on safety and what you can do to protect yourself online, kind of like looking both ways before you cross the street type of advice. So the OPC has created a graphic novel called Social Smarts: Privacy, the Internet, and You, to help young Canadians better understand and navigate privacy issues in the online world. It's a 12-page graphic novel and is designed to appeal to tweens and younger teens. And it was developed with feedback from young people. And it tells the story of a brother and sister who learn sometimes the hard way about the privacy risks related to social networking, mobile devices, and texting and online gaming. And to accompany the graphic novel, the OPC has also developed a discussion guide that educators can use to generate further discussion and learning. And I found this really helpful because I actually used some of their material for this presentation.
Next slide.
Yep. And so I know that's a lot of information, and the intent is not to sound alarm bells or to be technophobic or alarmist, but it's simply to raise awareness and protect ourselves as much as possible. And while there's much more to discuss about each topic, I hope that I've provided you with at least some starting points for discussion with your students as they navigate the murky and rapidly changing world of privacy in today's digital world.
Thank you, Tiffany. And I would love comments, questions from the audience. But let me get things started as you think and answer your questions there. So first of all, thanks so much, Tiffany. And I'm wondering from your end, like thinking about some tips or tricks. I know we discussed it kind of in the middle of the presentation, but like what are maybe your top three things that you've done in your life that you would recommend be passed along to young people for really kind of practical ways to protect themselves and their reputation and their privacy online?
One I got actually from law school,
Okay.
and this was when Facebook was popular. It's more popular amongst our age group, and
Right.
we were being recruited by law firms, and one of them came in and was like, "We will search you and we will find you, and whatever we find, we will judge you, and we might not hire you because of it." So after that talk, everyone went and changed their name to a fake name so that they weren't as easily found online. And, if you're not a social media influencer using your real name, which I don't recommend either, you could be pretty easily found. My name's fairly common, but if you type in enough search terms, you can find me. And so sometimes I Google myself and see what is there. There might be a really old photo or whatever. And sometimes you can actually ask websites to take it down, and people are aware enough about, about privacy issues that they often will comply. And if it's really bad, you can kind of, escalate it to, the privacy commissioner. But I think usually it's enough to just say, yeah, I don't want my photo there anymore. And it's your face. You can ask for it to be removed. Unless, it's a revenge porn type of situation, or it's like a disgruntled individual or related to a litigation issue. Like there are certain reasonable requests like that can be made.
Thanks for
that. Was one.
that was one. I'm wondering too, when we talk about settings, like do you have certain settings that you like to put on in terms of your browser?
Yeah, I never put it as public. I'm definitely more private, and I'm more private than your average person, given how much I love technology. And so I set my settings quite high, and I usually try to block my photo unless someone is a friend of a friend and they add me. And I check on the privacy settings. It's quite true that they change over time and they get more and more complicated. If you look at Facebook in, the mid 2000s, the privacy settings were quite simple, but now they're quite complex, and they have their own help center, and they deliberately hide certain settings so that they're hard to find. So, or it makes it extra hard, like it takes 10 clicks to delete a photo. That's deliberate. It's intended to kind of like frustrate people. So they're like, whatever, I'll just leave it there. If you're really intent on protecting your privacy, like go through those steps, like do your research, like look deeper into all the clicks.
I would say too, if you're considering at all going off a website or platform, from experience, I have on one that I'm thinking of, and I was thinking, oh, I don't want to lose all those photos. There's a way to delete your account and maintain all your data in your own kind of possession. So that shouldn't, I would just kind of say, for me, I when I was worried about losing certain photos or anything that I wanted to, as a keepsake, well, there's a way around that, so that became less of a determining factor for me staying on.
So requesting your own personal information is called an individual access request, is your right under Canadian federal privacy law. It's just really administrative, and it's a hassle, and you have to wait a while, and you might not get what you want. And so it is possible to request full deletion of your information. It's just an administrative headache, just like going through those extra 10 clicks to delete the photo. It's possible. But you just have to, oftentimes it's a matter of time and patience, even though your right is there. And so I think that's the problem. And I think some organizations that are privacy sensitive are trying to make that easier, but it slows down business. If you're a social media website that thrives on photos, giving everyone an easy way to get all their photos and delete the account is not in your interest, and it's not legally required to make it easy. So it might become more of a legal requirement to make it reasonably easy, but I just think there's a tension with the commercial interest and people's actual rights. And I think we have a question in the chat.
Yeah, so Patricia's asking, are companies still doing a digital check on potential employees? We often talk about employers who will see what you have posted on social media to judge if you would be a good candidate for their organization.
So it depends on the robustness of their HR program and how, I guess, ethical or privacy compliant they are. There are specialized like employee privacy protections. Some companies won't tell you. They might say, if you're in a high security, if you're going to go work for CSIS, they're going to try and look for everything. But if you're trying to work for, an everyday kind of medium-sized corporation, they might not even have the resources to engage a vendor that can do a deep web search, because they don't have an interest in it. And it's also quite privacy invasive, but they also might not tell you that they're doing that. So I think your chances are better that you just be safer to begin with. Like, it's unfortunate, a lot of the onus is on us living in a digital world to kind of try and intuit all the bad things that could happen. Like back in 2006, who knew that photo would be searched 10 years later? And so that's what a lot of the legislation about protecting minors is about, is like, if you're a young person partying for the first time, there might be an embarrassing photo. Is that supposed to bar them from gainful employment forever? I don't think that's fair. I don't think it's fair for adults either. And so I think it's a lot of change in social mores and hiring practices, where it's like, the Finnish prime minister is going to go for a party. Who cares?
Well, I think that, Tiffany, I actually thought about it when you were telling what an employee told you while you were in law school. Because I think, this is a privacy discussion, a reputation discussion, but it's also like kind of it's up to organizations and hiring bodies to evolve with the times, right? And maybe question and be in conversation with ideas of what's good and what's bad, right? And binaries and placing judgments. Just because things are more seen now doesn't mean that there necessarily should be kind of a rendering of judgment based on some social life photos that have been captured, right?
Everyone's a little bit public now, and it's becoming even more so. And that's what I'm really curious about, how the next generation's attitudes towards privacy are changing, because they they might have a better understanding. Like, yeah, everyone has a photo out there online, whether or not they've posted it themselves. Like, okay, but what guardrails are we put on it? If it's a photo of them committing a crime, okay, that's bad. If it's a photo of them going to a party because they're allowed to go to a party and they're not doing anything except having a good time and nothing nefarious is going on, then why hold that against them? At the end of the day, you're not going to be able to hire anybody that has ever gone to a party.
Right.
Like, I'm being a bit facetious, but we have to kind of create the spectrum of understanding as our lives become more online.
And just in these remaining few moments, if there are any remaining questions from the audience, and Tiffany, if there are any final points you would like to make.
No, really, I really enjoyed working with OJEN and support everything that you do. And I hope it's been useful for the audience in terms of educating their students and also learn from your students. I'd be very fascinated by what new apps and technologies are being used, because a lot of it's changing so quickly that this metaverse that we're talking about now might become as common as email in 20 years.
Yeah, I mean, I have resisted downloading TikTok despite really enjoying some of the content. I rely it being shared on other social
Me too.
platforms because there's some great stuff out there. Well, thank you, Tiffany, for your time and expertise. That was really fantastic. As I mentioned in the chat, the resources that Tiffany shared will be shared with you all in our post-session email. My colleague, Christy, will be posting a feedback form that we would love for you to fill out, which will also be included in the email that we send out afterwards. And lastly, I'd like to thank the Law Foundation, who generously supports so much of the great work that we're able to do, which includes this fantastic session from Tiffany. So thank you, everyone. And final plug for our next webinar of the year on Thursday, October 20th at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And that will be on LGBTQ+ rights in celebration of National Coming Out Day, which happens in October. So thank you all. Have a good evening.
Thank you.